With the rise of cloud computing, securing our data is more important than ever. Did you know that almost 4,000 new cyber attacks happen every single day? And a company falls prey to ransomware every 14 seconds. Now I sound like some of those cybersecurity videos that the companies make you watch, but it is actually that important. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the most famous AWS exploits and how to protect your data from them. Now, if you're watching this video, I assume you know what AWS is and pretty much how it works, but they have what they call a shared responsibility model. The AWS shares the responsibility of security and governance with their customers. And this model describes in detail what the responsibilities of the customer are and what the responsibility of AWS are when it comes to security. Here is one of their graphs that you would see when you look for AWS shared model. And basically, this is also referred as the security of the cloud and security in the cloud. So essentially, AWS is responsible for the physical servers, the virtualization, and the operating system, and the customers are responsible for managing their chosen operating system, managing the data inside, and security conversations like security groups and ACLs and whatnot. And this illustrates some of that, but of course this will vary depending on which service from AWS you actually use. For example, for EC2 instances, AWS will be responsible for the physical servers and some of the connections between the hard disk and your server and stuff like that. But what you actually run on those servers is your responsibility. But when it comes to Lambdas, they manage most of the Lambdas themselves. You only have your code, and in that case, you're not responsible for the operating system and anything that comes beyond your code. You're only responsible for the configuration and the code itself. So now that we understand this, let's talk about the most common exploits and misconfigurations in AWS. The first one, I think this is the most obvious one, is AWS Identity and Access Management tool. If you're not familiar with AWS IAM, this basically is how you manage access to everything in your account. How a service can access different services, how users can access your AWS account, your secret and public keys. And so basically all of the access is tied within the IAM tool. And this can get very complicated because it allows for very granular access. And it can be confusing at times depending on what you look. They have a lot of policies and different permissions and roles and whatnot between the services, but it's very important. And any misconfiguration in IAM is a very big threat. For example, if someone maliciously has access to your IAM credentials, they basically can log into your data, and depending on the roles of that user, they can access basically what the user can access. So AWS has this master user, which they recommend to never use for anything. Just use it to create a different admin, and then you can share and configure all the users. But if someone has access to that master user, then you're screwed. They can access all of your data, all of your code, all of your configurations. They can create new instances and build your account for it. And I found one example where a company actually was scraping GitHub repositories to find IAM credentials, and they managed to do this for a span of almost 3 years, where they made 474 EC2 instances in other people's accounts. And they used these instances to mine crypto. And that lasted for almost 3 years. So it is pretty serious. Those people were paying for something they're not using. And to protect yourself from this, please use the principle of least privilege. Use multi-factor authentication on all your credentials. Don't use credentials directly, use access keys, and just follow best practices when it comes to IAM credentials. And also regularly review who has access to your account, all the IAM credentials, and make sure that they have only the permissions they need. And the next one that I think is very, very common is public S3 buckets. I think this is the default setting in AWS, which makes it very easy to overlook. But if your S3 buckets are public, this could lead to data breaches and someone getting access to confidential data. And obviously you don't want that. Like, I found a repo that someone keeps track of all the S3 leaks that have happened, and this is just crazy. I mean, 22 terabytes of data over 17 million files, passport scans, tax documents, social security numbers. Yeah, so this is some serious stuff. And to protect yourself from this, always use block public access to your S3 buckets. And if you need your buckets to be public, or the objects you keep in your S3 buckets to be public, then use AWS CloudFront in front of them and protect the data and not expose it to the public. The third kind of most famous AWS exploit is the server-side request forgery. I think this is a very broad term, but this basically means if your client makes unauthorized requests to your backend and gains access to some of the data. One of the most common ways someone can do this is, for example, if you don't sanitize the inputs from the client and just run SQL queries or read files based on user input and stuff like that. And this can allow for someone maliciously to gain access to your data without even knowing. And this can also be a misconfiguration as well if you're using EC2 instances. For example, there was a famous attack a few years ago where Capital One, the credit card company, got attacked and someone managed to get access to 100 million customer data, which is crazy. And as far as I could understand, they couldn't really pinpoint where the exact entry to the hack was. Maybe I just couldn't find out, but the most suspected place was allowing the hackers to perform a server-side request forgery and gain access to all of that data. And if you have an EC2 instance, the way to protect yourself from this is to use to update to instance metadata service version 2 and restrict outbound traffic from your instance, and obviously sanitize any user input to not allow any unintended requests coming to your server. And don't just sanitize user input on the front end, you have to do that in the back end as well. Always assume that all requests are malicious and put guardrails, safety nets for those use cases. And another big one that I found is exposed database origin servers. I think this can be a gold mine for hackers, because if they know the origin servers for your databases, they can target them and try to gain access to your databases maliciously and basically hack their way into your databases. And the attacks here can be varied, but if your database IPs are private, there's no way for them to even get to that point and try to attack them. And we can ensure that a database is not publicly accessible and use proper network ACLs and security groups to protect. So yeah, I think this kind of showcases the ways that people can get into your account or find your data or hack your servers and stuff. But there's a lot of things that we can do to prevent ourselves from getting into these situations. And I'm gonna list 5 things here that I think are systematically great to implement in your team, in your workflow, in order to prevent yourself getting hacked. Now, the first one I would say is regularly audit your access and permissions. Now, security audits and assessments to identify any vulnerabilities and fix them can really help your application to stay safe and all your data to stay safe. By having these regular audits, you are gonna stay one step ahead of potential threats and ensure your AWS data is secure. And as we've seen before, someone getting access to IAM credentials can be detrimental. So have strong IAM policies, use multi-factor authentication, use the principle of least privilege, and these measures can significantly reduce the risk of your servers getting hacked. And because AWS is very complicated, with all the different servers have different ways to configure them, so we need to make sure that we have proper configuration, especially when it comes to security, like configuring security groups and network ACLs, encrypting the data in transit and the data in rest, as well as comprehensive logging to maintain control and protect the data. And this can really go a long way. And of course, we can do so many things to preemptively protect ourselves, our data, our servers, and our code. And staying updated is pretty obvious one, especially with today's world with all the npm packages and the way we build websites. But having all of your packages up to date, having the operating systems, and having all the security patches can really help protect you from vulnerabilities. Because most of the people that build these things, when they learn that there's a security breach or vulnerability, they fix it in a release a new version, and we need to keep updated with wherever we can basically. I've got 3 more recommendations, but the last one is going to be worth it, I promise. In most cases, the people that actually implement these are going to be engineers, the tech leads or whatever, and they need to have the proper security awareness training. If they don't know what the vulnerabilities are and how to protect themselves from those, they can implement stuff that has vulnerabilities and potentially open your data and websites to attacks. So having security awareness training for your team, for the people that actually build these things is very crucial. And of course, AWS has a ton of tools that you can use to protect pretty much everything. For example, AWS Config, CloudTrail, WAF, and all of these can help you enhance the security of your websites, and as well as provide very valuable monitoring and logging to actually help you understand where you might have vulnerability and how to fix it. And the last one is having a very good incident response plan. And of course, we can put all of the safety nets and safeguards and guardrails, whatever you want to call them, try to make the data and your websites the most secure ever. But we're all people, we can make mistakes, things can get vulnerable even without us knowing. There might be something new that people try to break. So having a good incident response plan is going to help you to minimize the impact if and or when an attack happens. And the process we put in place from the start, from the first line of code to the production servers, these are the things that are gonna help you stay secure and not exploit your customers' data. So yeah, that's been it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any feedback, put it down in the comments below. If you would like me to cover something, let me know again in the comments below. Like, subscribe, do all the things with the algorithm. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Happy coding. Bye.